5. Dion, please, tell Mummy. Please. You did. You did. You fell out of the tree without hands clawing at you. It was an accident then. Is the grave too cold? When you become fire and water and earth, you will not feel the cold. I can sleep now. I can sleep. Thank you, my dearest, thank you. And Mrs. Helen Spark let the tears come. They stained her white makeup. Her midnight emeralds were soothed by the water. But it hurt to cry. Crying was the final release after spiritual pain. Each time it was harder for her to give in to herself. Only hate was easy. She stored hate. But laughing and crying were more difficult than giving birth. Obvious to the humans in the room, the butterfly spread its Japanese fans. With a sunset on each wing, mounted the wind and floated out of the window. Then it swooped to the coloured blobs below, but it decided against them and settled on a lime tree overhanging the street. The decision was hardly surprising. The blobs were children. Led by Fat Billy, the Indians were chasing Little Bert. Little Bert sobbed as he ran. They were nearly onto him and would definitely eat him alive, which was very disturbing. His little body hurt with the running. He ran down the centre of the village street, swerved to the curb with the pack behind him, changed his mind, swerved back down the white line again. He kept on running. His vision jogged up and down and tears of fear streamed into his teeth. Barely avoiding a pile of horse manure, Bert screwed up his nose and headed for an alley. He passed Sparks' shop on the left. The gang were nearly on him. Suddenly he changed his direction and recrossed the road 100 yards beyond Sparks. This took Fat Billy by surprise, but being the efficient tyrant he was, he summoned his legions to about turn and surged after Bert. Bert slipped on an apple core a foot from the curb. He cricked his leg. A jerk of pain tensed his body, but he ran on, recrossing Sparks' shop and passing underneath the dozing butterfly. Then he splurged his foot on the edge of the house dung, and his momentum tripped him up. He sprawled some 4 feet the other side of the dung. It was smeared on the shoe of his hurt foot. The gang arrived. "Got you, Bertie, ain't we? Yes, we've got you, and now you'll pay for the trouble you've caused." Fat Billy's eyes disappeared into his chubby cheeks as boy sadism took over. "You may have to be sacrificed before the time comes, little Bertie, and the time's nearly here. Right, kids? We'll do the dance of death around him, and then we'll take him to the woods, and then his mum will never see him again, will she, little Bertie?" Susan, the pretty 8-year-old, moved out from behind Joan and demanded, "Isn't that cruel? You know, really cruel." "Course not. He's broken our rules. He lets his mum boss him about, and he tried to sneak off for his dinner when we hadn't given him no permission." Joan, with her pale nun's face, placed both hands on little Bert's shoulder. "You mean, Fat Billy, that you didn't give him permission, don't you?" "No, I mean what I says. We'll dance now. Get your mouth organ out, James, and play the right music." James pulled out a cheap mouth organ and began to make weird noises on it. Discordant and basically unmusical. The children improvised a dance round Bert, who was trying to clean the dung off his shoe and the cut on his knee. They chanted the pleasing words of death to Bertie, Bertie death, death to Bertie. They were so engrossed in their act of kindness they didn't hear an approaching lorry. Faces peered at them from behind cottage windows as the war dance progressed. The lorry piled round the corner. The children scampered onto the pavement, leaving Bertie in the middle of the road. Bewildered by dung, blood and death in his ear, Bertie sat perfectly still as the lorry stormed towards him. He was hypnotized by its roar. He could not move. Susan screamed at him, "Get up, Bertie! Get off the road!" He did not move. Unable to watch, Susan ran towards him as the lorry snarled to a halt. 2 feet from the boy, the engine pulsed. The lorry driver vaulted out of his saddle and picked the boy up. "You silly young basket! I could have squashed you flat!" Except for Susan, the other children had disappeared down various alleys. They decided not to face the music. Susan spoke up for Bert, who was rubbing his honey hands in his eyes, trying to staunch his water supply. "It's not his fault, mister, honest. It was us." She indicated behind her to the invisible legions. "Honest Injun it was." The lorry driver was overwrought with the horror of what had nearly happened. Behind his eyes he saw mirrored a writhing hunk of blood and bone decorating his mudguard. He belted Bertie round the ear. "I nearly killed you. Do you understand that? I would have had to take you home dead to your mother. You bloody kids don't know how near you push your luck." Bertie barely noticed the blow. He simply continued to cry. The lorry driver took him to the side of the road. He mopped the boy's eyes with his handkerchief and returned to his lorry. As he was about to remount, he turned and threw a shilling piece in the direction of Bertie. The coin rolled about 5 feet away from the boy. And then, with surprising alacrity, the swooping blubber of Fat Billy dived from one of the alleyways. Like a predatory owl, he scooped up the mouse shilling and flapped, fatness and all, into another alley. The lorry driver considered whether he should give chase and thump the bejesus out of the monster, or not. He thought better of it and levered himself into his saddle. "You've got some nice friends, I must say, but when you're bigger, you'll get him. Bullies always get their comeuppance. St. Valentine's Day is always hanging around some old garage." With this piece of profound Chicago philosophy released into the stratosphere, he drove off. The gang waited until the lorry was a hurtle of dust before re-entering the scene of their crime. Billy came up behind Bertie, intending to continue the punishment, when John, the twin, noticed the butterfly had perched on Rowbottom's window ledge. The children forgot their human victim and moved to destroy the insect. The Rowbottom side door opened and Gilly stepped into the street. "Sorry, gang, but I had to go for a pee." This woke the butterfly. It opened its twin sunsets and skittered into the air before the children could catch it. After a brief aerobatic display, it circled Bert's head twice and then parachuted down beside the boy. Bert was still spreading sprinkles of blood on his nose rag. It dribbled from a gritty cut just below his left knee. He did not notice the butterfly. The sun was moving towards 3 o'clock. Fat Billy grinned as the insect preened its peacock wings on the curb. He unfolded a licorice-stained handkerchief from a licorice-stained pocket and then carefully tiptoed towards the wings. The wings glimmered like an autumn bonfire. Billy could see them in his mind, pinned on a white card in his collection. This flame butterfly would go superbly with his giant hawk moth, which he had caught in the lavatory pan at the bottom of his garden. Bertie continued sniffing and dabbing the grit out of his wound. Moving quietly on chubby legs, Billy managed to keep his shadow from sliding over the butterfly. Nearer and nearer. The fat boy stretched the handkerchief out in his fingertips and poised over the orange wings. Then, with a smothering action, he netted it. Or so he thought, but he hadn't completely covered the insect. The wings shuffled into the sunlight. Desperately, Billy grabbed. Bertie stood up and deflected Billy's aim. The butterfly flew twice round the boys before climbing onto the mane of a passing breeze and being sucked into the Sparks' shop. Immediately, all the children clattered into the shop after their prize rainbow. Outside the loft where Mrs. Spark was holding her supposed literary meeting, Anna Spark listened at the keyhole. Her curved breasts were tense with concentration. She could not hear exactly what was being said, but she sensed that her mother was experimenting in the other dimension. Unlike her mother, her eyes were not deep with the midnight. They were a softer green, hinting pike pools and foam. The nose was subtly hooked, or reminiscent of the Romans, but very attractive. Her lips hinted sensual promise and even greater knowledge. As the electricity buzzed through the keyhole, Anna felt the power of the summer churn in her navel. She started sweating under her arms and breasts. She heard the children clatter into the shop below. Swiftly she turned away from the door. Her lips brightened into a wet smile. In the shop, Mr. Spark was practically knocked over by the onslaught. The gang pursued their rainbow as it fluttered between the sweet jars. Mr. Spark began to swear continuously, his language built to a crescendo. He swung his arms like lengths of lead in the direction of Susan, who was crawling between his feet.
For Christ's immaculate sake! Bloody hell, bugger me! Why don't you little illegitimates go to hell?
He yelled these and other advanced compliments. The children ignored him. Billy had temporarily trapped the butterfly in the box of nude dolls. It was about to escape again. There was no alternative. He picked up a jar of sweets and raised it high above the insect before smashing it down. A crushed rainbow stained the naked dolls. One doll was dented in the navel. A feeler was lushed across its face. Mr. Spark's hand flailed out of a slice of sunshine and thrashed Billy hard, very hard, across the nape of his neck. Like a plump minnow, Billy splashed all his blubber into the arms of the dolls. The hysteria in the children sank to their feet. They froze, waiting for the punishment. With a firm hand, Mr. Spark removed the minnow from the dolls and threw him towards the frightened tadpoles. Then he carefully picked up the colours of the rainbow. The butterfly, or what was left of it, lay in the palm of his hand. Its bonfire only twisted ashy now. It had lost a wing and both legs. A sludge brown leaked where the body had been. Breathless from the blow, Billy still refused to cry.
How destructive can you get, Billy? You children make me vomit sometimes. Only sometimes, but this is one of the times. This killing was pointless, Billy. Pointless.
Billy nodded in agreement. Oh, he hated Mr. Spark, and the time would come. Pretty soon. The time would come. Then, without any sign of preparation, the children bunched towards Billy. Bert joined with them. The chant was taken up. Death to Billy, he's a piggy, death to Billy. Billy was frightened. He knew they could tear him apart. Desperately, he tried to enforce his dictatorship. It was useless. His personal guard was sharpening their claws against him. Mr. Spark was so disgusted with the boy that he folded his arms and played the voyeur. A week ago, and a daughter alive, he would have stopped them. But not now. Anarchy was the norm. Why bother about the British Constitution? Susan, Gilly and Joan turned into cats. They gouged at Billy with bitter nails. The twins began inflicting the unceremonious boot, and Bert, stroking his wounded knee, applauded the democracy. Gilly probed ruthlessly at Billy's cheekbones. Susan plucked weeds from the boy's head. In fact, the final violence was coming. The desire to mutilate frothed inside them. They wanted to rip boyhood out of Billy. With generations of barbarianism behind them, The children were tearing down Rome. Anna entered as they snarled for the kill. She acted quickly without thinking. In preparation for an omelette, she cracked Joan and Gilly's heads together, then kicked the twins firmly in the rear, dealt a badly executed uppercut to Susan, and the revolution against the fat hierarchy terminated.
Stop crying, Billy,
she shouted.
I'm not. Right, gang?
Billy leapt to his feet to assume his dynasty.
Right, gang, you'll pay for this, and I mean it.
As the gang could only work under orders and knew it, now their passion had subsided. They were willing to suffer the penalty for thundering against the right divine. They knew the results of rebelling against God without reading Paradise Lost. Mr. Spark watched with remote interest. Anna took the twins by the hands and led them out of the shop. Like truant's puppies, the gang followed. Still holding the butterfly, Mr. Spark walked into the sunlight. He handed the butterfly to Anna. She examined it closely.
Bury it, Anna. It's got a right to a funeral. More right than we have.
It's beautiful for a start.
Mr. Spark re-entered the shop and ate a licorice all sort. 2 licorice all sorts. Dumbly the children followed Anna down the high street towards the woods. Billy ventured a question.
Where are we going then?
To give this butterfly a funeral, Billy. She blew it off her hand into a hedgerow. It seemed a broken snapdragon or a shriveled yellow rose petal. It was a good funeral. Anna smelt the scent of death in her hand. Children, we are going to have a nature ramble, with all that implies. The children cheered. They were not sure what implies meant, but they understood the feeling, and they were excited. The wood was a flood of green. Anna thought how appropriately the trees reflected her eyes. She casually swung her hips and felt good. Mr. Spark put a sign up in the shop door and wandered to the pub. The sign read, "I'm in pub, Spark." Anna wanted something the children could not give her. A real nature ramble.